You know, it's a shame that YouTube wasn't around in the 1970s and the 1980s, because there's this one event that my grandfather and my father used to joke about all the time, and I was too young to remember it. It happened on, of all days, July 4th, 1976. At the time, I was 4 years old, and I had no memory of ever watching it. In fact, I have never seen footage of it. Yet it's an event that many people in my family talked about for ages afterwards. And that was Tim McCarver's Grand Slam that wasn't.
Philadelphia Baseball History presents the Grand Slam that wasn't. Mugs, phone cases, t-shirts, and more, all in our merch store. Celebrate your favorite player or team. Link in the description below.
Now, most young baseball fans, if they remember Tim McCarver at all, will remember Tim McCarver as being a broadcaster who retired 7 years ago. But before that, he was a catcher. In the 1960s, he was a big part of a strong Cardinals team, and when he was traded to the Phillies, he was a fan favorite. In fact, he was the Philly who introduced the Philly Fanatic in 1978 on the popular children's show Captain Noah and His Magical Ark. Now, Tim McCarver had two stints with the Phillies. The Phillies first acquired him in 1970. It was that infamous trade where the Phillies gave away Dick Allen, Cookie Rojas. In return, they were supposed to get Curt Flood, Bob Horner, Byron Brown, and Tim McCarver. But Flood saw how the Philadelphia fans treated Dick Allen, and he didn't want to experience that. So he refused to report to the Phillies. Instead, he fought to try to do away with the dreaded reserve clause, which essentially made players the property of the team they played for and had very little choice in where they would play, since they could be traded against their will. So Flood wanted to be recognized as a free agent. Now, his personal quest to be a free agent failed, but he's largely credited with being the spark that lit the fire that eventually did away with the reserve clause and brought free agency to baseball. So McCarver played with the Phillies for about 2 years, and in 1972, he was traded away to the Expos. But he signed with the Phillies again, this time as a free agent in 1975. Now, as I said, McCarver had been a star catcher with the St. Louis Cardinals, and when he played with the Cardinals, he got to know a certain left-handed pitcher known as Steve Carlton. And McCarver was briefly reunited with Carlton when Lefty joined the Phillies in 1972. But that was only for a few months, because in June of 1972 is when the Phillies traded McCarver. When McCarver returned, the Phillies began using him mostly as a backup catcher, somebody who could spell their star young catcher, Bob Boone, every 5 days so that Boone could get a rest. So the Phillies used McCarver to catch on the days that Steve Carlton started. The joke was that McCarver had become Carlton's personal catcher. McCarver himself joked that when he died, he ought to be buried 60 feet 6 inches away from Steve Carlton. And McCarver must have done something right, because Carlton had a record of 81 wins and 45 losses when McCarver was catching for him. That's a winning percentage of .643, compared to Carlton's lifetime winning percentage of .574. But let's set the stage for 1976. The United States, and in particular the city of Philadelphia, was all set to celebrate the nation's bicentennial. In fact, the Phillies had landed the Major League All-Star game that year, both in celebration of the bicentennial and the fact that Philadelphia hosted the first Major League game 100 years before on April 22nd, 1876. That was when the first athletics club played the Boston Red Stockings, who are now the Atlanta Braves. But on July 4th, when the city was celebrating with a ceremony that was hosted by Charlton Heston and featured President Gerald Ford, followed by a 5-hour parade, the Phillies spent the day playing a doubleheader in Pittsburgh. This was a young Phillies team that was just coming into its own. Think back to the disastrous collapse of 1964. The Phillies had only had 3 winning seasons between 1964 and 1975. But the team had an influx of young, talented players. Players like Larry Bowa, Greg Luzinski, Bob Boone, Mike Schmidt. By 1975, the Phillies had climbed all the way up to second place, a mere 6.5 games behind that very Pirates team that they faced that day. And on July 4th, 1976, the Phillies started the day in first place in the National League East, a full 9 games ahead of the Pirates. And as you might expect, the first game featured Steve Carlton on the mound for the Phillies, so of course Tim McCarver was in the lineup. The game was scoreless when the Phillies came to bat at the top of the second inning. Left fielder Greg Luzinski hit a triple. That was followed by a Dick Allen walk. Luzinski then scored on a J. Johnstone double, with Allen advancing to third. And then Pirates pitcher Larry Demery intentionally walked Gary Maddox in order to get to McCarver and set up the double play. So with the bases loaded, nobody out, McCarver came to the plate. And McCarver hit a ball that cleared the right field fence. He had hit a grand slam, and in the excitement, McCarver started rounding the bases. Except that the runner on first, Gary Maddox, didn't have a great view of where the ball went. He was actually returning to first so he could tag up. And as Gary Maddox was returning to first, Tim McCarver was rounding the bag and passed him on the base path. For passing the runner in front of him, McCarver was called out. However, he'd already touched first base, so he was awarded a single and an out. And he was also awarded 3 RBIs. And this was called McCarver's Grand Slam single. The Phillies won the first game of that doubleheader by a score of 10-4. In fact, the Phillies would go on to win the National League East that year, amassing 101 victories, which was the most of any Phillies team up until that point. But in the NLCS, the Phillies would fall to the Big Red Machine, who eventually won the World Series in 1976. In fact, in the NLCS, the Reds swept the Phils in 3 games. But 1976 was the first of 3 consecutive years where the Phillies would win the NL East championship. In fact, the core of that team would go on to win the franchise's first World Series in 1980. Now, McCarver, he retired from baseball in November of 1979. But he was such a popular figure in Philadelphia that the Phillies brought him back in September of 1980 so he could be on the roster and play in the last month of the season. And technically, he was part of the Phillies teams that won their first World Championship. The same play had only happened once before. That was on July 9th, 1970 in Detroit. The Tigers were playing the Boston Red Sox, and Dalton Jones of the Tigers passed his teammate Don Wirt in the base path. So Jones was called out and awarded a 3-run single. Now, a similar play happened in Game 5 of the 1999 NLCS. This was October 17th, 1999. The score was tied 3-3 when Robin Ventura came to bat for the Mets. Bases were loaded, and Ventura seemingly hit a walk-off grand slam to end the game and keep the Mets' pennant hopes alive. However, the runner on first, Todd Pratt, stayed put and then grabbed Ventura and lifted him in the air when Ventura reached first base. Excited by the win, the Mets mobbed Ventura between first and second, and so Robin Ventura was prevented from touching all the bases. So Ventura was ruled to have hit a single, and since the Mets only needed 1 run to win, only 1 run counted. So the Mets still won of a score of 4-3, and this play was referred to as Ventura's Grand Slam single.
Don't forget to like, click, and subscribe. Please consider becoming a patron at Patreon. Link in the description below. And we have a merch store. We have a variety of t-shirt designs available, plus mugs, phone cases, and face masks. Thank you so much for watching.